Hey guys, if you were born a medieval king in a year like 1263 or 1147, some distant, muddy chapter in a dust-smeared chronicle, you'd probably open your tiny royal eyes to the side of a soot-stained canopy overhead, flickering candlelight casting warped shadows on damp stone walls, and a midwife muttering prayers over your head while staring nervously at the blood-red comet that had blazed across the sky just the night before. Your first breath might be taken not in triumphant glory but in confusion, as the air was thick with incense, sheep tallow, and the faint aroma of burned barley. You'd be swaddled in scratchy wool, dyed a dull brownish crimson, and then promptly announced as either a blessing or a curse, depending on which local monk had last consulted his book of omens. Spoiler alert. It's never good when a crow caws 3 times during your birth. You're small. Too small, someone whispers. You have wispy hair like wet hay and skin the color of pale honey. The midwives argue whether that means you're destined for sainthood or suffocation. Your lungs work. Barely. You let out a noise like a mouse sneezing, and everyone cheers. Your mother lies weak and cold beside you, already halfway to heaven, while your father, if he's even in the castle, is busy hunting something pointlessly large and symbolic in the woods. Welcome to royalty. The astrologer shows up late, breathless, his scrolls unrolling like limp lettuce in his arms. He declares that the planets are misaligned and your destiny is turbulent but interesting. Whatever that means. He also smells faintly of fermented apples and something worse. A pigeon flaps through the open window and poops on the cradle, which, in medieval symbology, could mean either fortune or feces. They light more incense just in case. Your first weeks are a gamble. The servants whisper that a prior prince had been swapped for a piglet, and no one noticed for weeks. So they keep checking to make sure you're not sprouting bristles. They boil your laundry in rainwater and rosemary and swaddle you in linen that's been patched so many times it looks like a medieval quilt of regret. You sleep in a cradle carved from storm-felled oak, rumored to be cursed because it once belonged to a baron who died choking on a walnut. Your food, if you can call it that, starts as a slurry of mashed turnip and goat milk, stirred with a wooden spoon someone also used to stir their soup. You spit most of it out, which is wise. There's probably grit in it. Your gums itch, and your belly gurgles, and every hiccup is met with the wide-eyed panic of a royal court terrified that the heir might expire from indigestion. Every day begins with chants. Not lullabies, mind you, but actual Latin prayers to ward off demons. A bishop blesses your nursery once a week with a damp twig. He flicks holy water everywhere and avoids eye contact. It's been that kind of century. The court nurse tells you stories about other kings, ones who were born under similar omens. One was trampled by a goat before he turned 2. Another got lost in the castle and was raised by scullery maids for 5 years before anyone noticed. The vibe is not comforting, but you survive. You're lucky or too stubborn to die. Maybe both. The rats ignore you, which is a good sign, and the castle dog licks your face once and doesn't bark, which apparently means you're blessed. At least that's what the cook says, though she also talks to her cabbages. You develop a habit of blinking at important visitors, and drooling on your own fists, which is mistaken for wisdom. People start whispering that you're an unusually contemplative baby. Someone paints a small portrait of you with a faint golden halo. The paint smudges, but the rumor sticks as you grow from wrinkly squishling to something resembling a human potato. You begin to notice things. The nurse always smells like sour cream and barley. The bells ring often, usually to mark either prayer, death, or lunch. It's hard to tell which. The castle has no windows in the nursery, only slits where the wind whistles like a ghost, catching its breath. You're wrapped in 3 layers of linen to keep out the cold, but your fingers still turn blue by dawn. Your parents, oh yes, them, make irregular appearances. Your mother, wan and weak, kisses your forehead like a porcelain doll. She's afraid of breaking. Your father strides in, sometimes smelling of sweat, wine, and triumph, lifts you once like a sack of flour, and declares you sufficient. One day he brings you a small wooden sword. You drool on it. He looks satisfied. You cry one night, inconsolable, and a passing monk whispers that the devil's riding your spine. They dunk you briefly in a basin of slightly blessed water and recite something in a nervous tone. You fart and fall asleep. Everyone cheers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I do here. I promise more plagues, poisons, and oddly comedic deaths await you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because your journey, little king, is only just beginning. And history, especially medieval royal history, has a peculiar way of ensuring that every chapter ends strangely, often sideways, and occasionally with someone accidentally exploding. Your royal nursery smells of mold, damp straw, and a lingering hint of boiled cabbage that no amount of incense seems able to disguise. The tapestries on the walls depict heroic scenes: knights on horseback, dragons bleeding artistically, saints pointing at clouds, but they're moth-eaten and faded, their once vibrant reds and blues dulled to the shades of tired beets and overcooked peas. The floor is stone, always cold, always damp, always with a puddle or two that no one remembers spilling. You're placed on a fur rug that may or may not still house a family of fleas, but it's the softest thing you've got. Your cradle, carved by some blind carpenter centuries ago, creaks ominously with every shift of your tiny royal weight. The hinges on your nursery door moaned like a cow in labor whenever opened, which is often because people keep peeking in to make sure the future monarch is still breathing. A royal tutor arrives just to gaze at you while you nap, sighing deeply, as if calculating how long he'll have to wait before he can bore you with the Latin names of vegetables. There's a small hearth in the room, the kind that does more for ambience than heat. It smokes unpredictably, leaving soot trails along the stone and sometimes setting off sneezing fits among the staff. A nursemaid fans the fire constantly, muttering curses under her breath about smoke spirits, while another paces the room, counting your toes every morning, just in case one has vanished during the night. As a toddler king in waiting, your world is confined to this drafty room, with its high ceilings, leaky windows, and candles mounted in wrought iron sconces that drip wax on unsuspecting passers-by. You try to crawl once, heading optimistically toward the door, but the slippery stone and your over-padded woolen leggings cause you to roll sideways into a stool. The stool wins. You learn to walk eventually, sort of. It's more of a stagger, really, made all the more dramatic by your tiny boots, which are hand-sewn from goat hide and far too rigid for your chubby feet. You stomp about the nursery like a confused duckling, arms wide, crown slightly askew. Yes, they made you a baby crown, while various noble ladies giggle behind fans and declare you sovereignly adorable. The smell never leaves the nursery. Sometimes it shifts, from damp hay to moldy bread, from wax smoke to slightly sour milk, but it's always there. They try to mask it with herbs. Sprigs of lavender and sage are stuffed in little pouches and hung around the room like a medieval air-freshening system. Unfortunately, it just adds layers to the stench. At night, the shadows stretch long across the flagstones, and the candlelight flickers in a way that makes the tapestries seem to move. You become convinced that one of the saints is watching you and blinking. Your caretakers attempt entertainment. A minstrel is brought in once to play soft tunes on a lyre, but the strings snap mid-song, flinging one directly into a torch. The resulting panic scorches one tapestry and singes the poor man's eyebrows. He's never invited back. Instead, you're given carved wooden animals and a stuffed pig made of straw and linen. You name it, Lord Bacon. It becomes your closest friend. During this time, you're still not allowed outside. The court fears a sudden draft might undo all the progress you've made toward not dying. You stare longingly at the slit-like windows, watching the sun crawl across the same patch of sky, day after day. Occasionally, a bird lands on the ledge, peers inside with a look of confused judgment, and flaps away. One day, a bat gets in. Absolute chaos. The nurse climbs a table, the tutor hides behind a chest, and you, calmly, name the bat Sir Squeaks-a-Lot. They catch it eventually, using your blanket as a net. You mourn its departure for days. There's also a cat. A fat, stripy creature named Wolfgar, who claims the sunny corner of the nursery and tolerates your existence. He lets you tug his tail once before issuing a single, disapproving swat. From then on, you merely bow politely as you pass. Your diet evolves. You graduate from questionable gruel to a kind of soft bread soaked in watered-down mead. Occasionally, you're fed mashed peas and fragments of dried apple, though the apples are often more worm than fruit. A cook brings you a tiny roasted quail for your second birthday. It's slightly burned, but you gnaw on it with the enthusiasm of a child who's never tasted anything not boiled. You dribble grease all over your robe. Everyone applauds. There's a painting of you commissioned around this time. It's flattering, with bright cheeks and a disproportionately large crown. Your fingers look like sausages, and your eyes are strangely cross-eyed. But the painter insists it captures your regal innocence. It's displayed prominently in the hallway, and you grow up watching servants walk past it, pause, and stifle giggles. Every so often, someone important comes to see you. A distant uncle, a papal envoy, a merchant with suspiciously fine boots. They bring gifts, velvet shoes you can't walk in, gold cups you're not allowed to use, and once, a live monkey on a leash. The monkey escapes within the hour, is found asleep in the chapel, and the bishop has an absolute meltdown. Even sleep, once your greatest pastime, becomes complicated. The crib's too small. You're moved to a child-sized bed with a feather mattress that leaks quills. The blanket smells like wet hay. You have dreams, vivid, strange ones, of forests on fire, horses dancing, and your stuffed pig speaking fluent Latin. You mention this last one to your tutor. He writes it down in a worried tone. One night, lightning strikes the east tower. The whole castle shakes. A gargoyle falls off the chapel roof and crushes the goose coop. The geese do not forgive. For weeks, every time you're carried past them, they hiss as though you caused the storm. You grow up with a deep mistrust of poultry, and yet somehow you thrive. You remain a mildly sickly but surviving child in a world that's just one bad stew away from mass cholera. You're slightly spoiled, occasionally ignored, and surrounded by adults who fear you, adore you, and regularly forget you exist. You develop a stubborn resilience, a taste for honey cakes, and an excellent throwing arm. Your nursery will one day be described by court historians as the site of early genius. But for now, it remains what it always was. Cold, weird-smelling, filled with shadows and poorly latched windows, and exactly where the future weirdest king in history begins his slow, squishy rise to power. The royal feast that gives you worms isn't even your fault. It's your third birthday, and the entire great hall is buzzing with anticipation. A procession of questionable meats and creatively overcooked vegetables marches onto the long wooden table, where trenchers made of week-old bread await the greasy bounty. You are seated at the high table, barely tall enough to peek over your gilded plate, your head still too heavy for your neck, wearing a miniature robe dyed with crushed beetles and a crown that keeps slipping over one eye. Everyone coos. You burp loudly. A knight to your left calls it a good omen. The feast is meant to be grand, symbolic, a declaration to all the courtiers and would-be usurpers that the kingdom's tiniest monarch is robust, hearty, and able to digest mutton without exploding. The menu includes roast boar, blood pudding, boiled eggs with questionable yolks, cabbage so limp it weeps, and the pièce de résistance, pigeon pie, enormous, steaming and topped with a golden crust sculpted to resemble a miniature castle. The pie is wheeled in with flair by a sweating servant who almost trips on the rushes. Trumpets sound. You're handed a silver spoon, and you dig in. The first bite is warm, a bit chewy. The second bite reveals something crunchy. Not bones, no, worse. It's movement. You pause, blink. A worm waves politely at your uvula. You vomit down your front, which someone immediately declares to be a sign of royal sensitivity. Your father roars with laughter. Your mother dabs at your chin with a scented cloth. The cook, pale as the parchment the menu was written on, excuses herself to check on the goose. By morning, half the castle has what the apothecary calls tummy misfortunes. You develop a fever and hallucinate that your wooden pig, Lord Bacon, is judging you, which he is, silently, from the foot of your sickbed. You're confined to your room again, this time with a clay pot of chamomile, a small bucket, and an elderly nurse named Isolde, who smells faintly of onions and failure. Isolde tells you it's good luck to purge early. She herself once ate a tainted eel at a winter solstice party and claims it gave her the gift of second sight. You nod politely while clutching your belly and watching a small slug crawl across the floor tiles. You name the slug Sir Wiglington. He disappears under the wardrobe and is never seen again. The court, ever keen to find a lesson in every near tragedy, issues a decree banning pigeons from royal kitchens. This is later amended to no unsupervised pigeons. A monk writes a short hymn about your survival, sung once during Vespers, and then promptly forgotten. The pie itself is preserved for posterity. They shellac it and put it in the crypt. No one visits it, but it remains part of the official inventory for 2 centuries. Despite the digestive drama, you recover. Children in the Middle Ages either bounced back or didn't, and you, surprisingly, bounce. After 2 weeks of broth and ginger chews, you're upright again, waddling around your nursery, occasionally stopping to clutch your side with theatrical flair. The court calls this noble fragility. The servants call it pigeon pie syndrome. Your appetite returns, slowly. You become cautious, suspicious of all food that jiggles or smells too strongly of team. One day, you're offered a sugared fig, a rare delicacy brought by a diplomat from a distant land. You stare at it for a long time. Then you lick it once. The court cheers. Someone writes a sonnet. The fig is declared holy. By now, your meals are closely supervised. The taster, a grim-looking man with one eyebrow and no sense of humor, samples every dish before it touches your plate. He has a permanent twitch, and once bit into a bread roll, only to discover a spider. You found it hilarious. He didn't. Your dietary restrictions become the stuff of legend. No meat from birds smaller than a duck. No roots harvested under a full moon. No cheese unless it has been blessed. Twice. No eggs that wobble. The cook keeps a journal, the digestive chronicles of his royal smallness, where she records which foods make you frown, cry, or hiccup rhythmically. One entry reads, Monday, he wept after parsnips. Tuesday, threw sausage at the jester. Wednesday, chewed candle wax, seemed pleased. Still, food is ceremony. You sit through banquets with wide eyes and tiny sips. You watch knights gnaw on turkey legs and nobles argue over the last plum tart. You're introduced to the concept of grace, a prayer mumbled quickly before everyone devours everything. You try to copy it once, mixing Latin words with baby babble. The bishop claps, and then there's the soup, always the soup. Thin, brown, full of floating things, herbs, grains, something that might be turnip. It becomes your default meal, your comfort food, your fallback. One day, you tip the bowl into your lap. It's hot. You scream. The castle physician rushes in with a potion made from marigolds and crushed snail shells. It helps, sort of. You develop a new rule. No soup in silk. The memory of the worm pie never quite leaves you. It lingers, like the scent of musty banners in the hall. Years later, when you're shown a tapestry depicting your 3rd birthday feast, you squint at the pie and swear you can see something wriggling. You have the tapestry quietly relocated to the cellar, behind the barrels, next to the broken lute. In the end, the feast becomes a legend, not for its grandeur, but for the small, wriggling truth it revealed. That even in the opulence of royal life, you're just one bad pastry away from disaster. That no amount of velvet or gold can save a child from an undercooked bird. And that sometimes survival tastes like burnt toast and smells faintly of onions and regret. Schooled in swordplay and superstition, you enter the next phase of your odd royal upbringing with a wooden practice blade in one hand and a sprig of dried rosemary stuffed in your belt, courtesy of a superstitious nurse who insists it wards off night terrors, boils, and overly ambitious cousins. You are 5 years old, barely taller than a wine barrel, and already expected to master the twin arts of decapitating straw dummies and navigating the invisible world of omens, portents, and absurdly specific bad luck. Your first tutor arrives wearing a robe dusted with chalk and a face carved by disappointment. Master Cadwell. His eyebrows resemble falcons in mid-flight, and his breath permanently smells of aged garlic and faint despair. He teaches you Latin by making you copy the word bellum, war, 50 times on parchment, made from the skin of something that probably didn't die peacefully. You hold the quill wrong. He sighs often. Alongside these grim language lessons, you are schooled in etiquette, which mostly involves learning not to spit at people you dislike or lick the serving ladle. You fail repeatedly. You're also introduced to arithmetic, which you mispronounce as angry ticks, and thus refuse to learn until someone clarifies it doesn't involve insects. But it's not all ink and rules. Oh no, you're also trained in swordplay, or rather, you're handed a wooden stick, roughly shaped like a blade, and told to poke with conviction. Your instructor is a retired knight, missing 3 fingers, 2 teeth, and any trace of patience. He bellows like a bear and smells like pickled onions. You try your best. You swing, you fall, you whack yourself in the shin. The knight nods approvingly. Sometimes the lessons shift. A priest arrives to talk about God. A juggler teaches you balance. A falconer brings an owl named Agnes, who hates you specifically and refuses to land on your wrist unless bribed with an unreasonable quantity of mice. And then there are the days when learning is postponed because someone spotted a strange cloud, or the castle cat sneezed 3 times, or someone accidentally spilled salt near a doorway. Superstition, you see, is also part of your education. You're taught to fear eclipses, crows, red-haired goats, odd numbers, and Tuesdays. You learn to knock thrice on oak when someone mentions death, and to avoid sneezing before noon, lest you anger the spirit of your great-uncle, who once fell down a well during a sneeze and wasn't found until spring. You don't question any of it. It's just life. Before major lessons, your caretakers rub crushed fennel on your temples to improve memory. It doesn't. Before bedtime, you're sometimes given a warm drink with honey and spider whisper powder, a concoction of herbs allegedly gathered by a woman who talks to insects. You don't sleep better, but you do have vivid dreams of ants playing flutes. On Fridays, you're paraded through the chapel for moral instruction. The bishop, rotund and chronically sleepy, reads aloud from a Latin text while gesturing vaguely towards painted windows. You admire the colors more than the message. One story involves a saint who spontaneously combusted from holiness. You ask if that can happen to you. The bishop mutters something about unlikely, but not impossible, and changes the subject. Despite all this, you start to grow. Your legs stretch, your teeth fall out. You develop an alarming fondness for collecting shiny rocks, which you call wizard's teeth, and insist on carrying in a velvet pouch. The court begins to refer to you as eccentric, a kind word. You're left-handed, which some find suspicious. You speak to animals, which others find adorable. And you invent a language consisting entirely of grunts and whistles, which your tutor finds utterly exasperating. Magic, or the fear of it, also becomes part of the curriculum. You're shown a scroll filled with symbols and told to never, ever read this aloud. Naturally, you try. You read 3 lines before a torch blows out and someone's soup curdles. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the scroll is locked away, and you are made to swear never to dabble again. You promise. Then immediately try again, in secret, while hiding under the tapestry, depicting Saint Margarita wrestling a dragon. Physical training continues, though with uneven results. You learn to ride a pony named Malice, who hates everyone equally, but steps only on your toes. You attempt archery, miss the target entirely, and strike a passing stable boy's hat. He applauds. You are declared promising with potential for menace. In your free time, you build tiny siege engines out of sticks and sling rocks at the rats in the courtyard. You write your name in mud. You try to train Lord Bacon, your ever-loyal stuffed pig, to stand guard at your chamber door. He does not. But you assign him a knightly title anyway, Sir Bacon of Bedpost. By age 7, you've absorbed more nonsense than knowledge. But it's the kind of nonsense that sticks. The kind that tells you the left foot must enter a room first. That iron under the bed keeps away ghosts. And that if you sleep facing north, your dreams will be blessed by your ancestors, or cursed by them, depending on their mood. You begin to question things, subtly. Why must the windows remain shuttered during rainstorms? Why do we not eat fish with scales during Lent's second Thursday? Why does Master Cadwell weep silently while grading your Latin? Your questions are met with loving sighs, ominous silences, and once a single cupcake, bribery wrapped in frosting. Still, you persist. You're a little odd, a little clever, and utterly unprepared for what's ahead. You don't know it yet, but your strange lessons in swordplay and superstition will one day prove surprisingly useful when a jealous uncle tries to assassinate you with a cursed lemon tart. But for now, you scribble crooked letters, swing your wooden sword like a drunk duck, and whisper nightly prayers to saints whose names you can't pronounce. And somewhere in the castle, someone watches, quietly taking notes, as the kingdom's most bizarre royal slowly sharpens his wits. And maybe, just maybe, his destiny. Your first battle, against the common cold, arrives with little ceremony, but no shortage of drama. It begins one morning when you wake up with a nose like a dripping spigot, your head hot enough to bake bread, and a cough so loud it startles the hounds in the courtyard. You're 6, going on 7, and this is your first proper illness. Not a tumble or a tummy ache, not the usual fever dreams brought on by spoiled gooseberries, but a genuine, full-blown, medieval head cold. And in a castle with poor insulation, suspect hygiene, and a complete lack of understanding of germs. This is treated as a royal crisis. The apothecary is summoned, a man with more beard than face, and a constant scent of vinegar and despair. He inspects your tongue, sniffs your breath, and taps your knees twice before declaring you humid of spirit and damp in the lung. He prescribes a treatment involving hot eel broth, a poultice made of mashed beetroot and crushed snail shells, and an amulet stuffed with dried mint and a crow feather. You're told to wear it around your neck until your symptoms flee in shame. Your nurse insists on bundling you in 6 layers of wool, which only makes you sweat profusely. Your bed is layered with extra blankets, then straw, then a thin sheet of waxed linen for insulation. You resemble a sandwich made by someone who misunderstood the concept of lunch entirely. You cannot move, only sniffle. You attempt to speak, croak something resembling "no more eel," and are promptly given more eel, now with an added sprinkle of dried thyme for the throat. It doesn't help. In fact, it makes you hiccup violently. The castle echoes with your sharp, wet hiccups for an entire afternoon. The steward writes a poem about it, for reasons no one fully understands. By the second day, your fever climbs. You dream that the tapestries are whispering. You think the stuffed pig, Lord Bacon, has moved closer. You're sure the owl from your earlier lesson is perched on your bedpost, judging your mucus output. When you awake, cold sweat sticking your hair to your forehead, your room smells of boiled nettles and burnt cloves. Apparently, someone decided that fumigation by spices would banish the illness. All it does is make you sneeze continuously for 3 hours. One sneeze blows the candle out. The staff calls it a miracle. Superstition kicks into high gear. Salt is thrown over your pillow. A cracked mirror is removed from the chamber with ceremonial tongs. An old crone is brought in to hum lullabies in a forgotten dialect of Saxon while circling your bed and sprinkling what she claims is holy moss. The apothecary now carries a live frog in his pouch to absorb excess phlegm. He never explains how. You are not allowed to bathe, lest the water draw the cold deeper into your bones. Instead, you are rubbed down daily with warm sheep grease and sage. This makes you slippery and smell like a culinary accident. The castle cat refuses to come near you. Wolfgar gives you a look that clearly says, "You did this to yourself." Still, you're royal, and thus your suffering must be dignified. A painter is summoned to record the scene. You're sketched lying weakly in bed, one hand clutching a handkerchief, the other resting on Lord Bacon. In the background, your nurse is immortalized, mid-sneeze, her eyes wide with horror. The painting is later hung in a corridor, labeled "Heroic Trials," despite the lack of modern medicine, and possibly because of your sheer stubbornness. You begin to recover. Your appetite returns. You manage to sit up without wheezing like a bellows. Your hair no longer sticks up like scorched hay, and your eyes lose their glazed donut sheen. You even eat a piece of stale bread without crying. A small victory. To celebrate, the kitchen prepares a recovery pudding, a soft grey blob flavored with cinnamon and hope. You eat half before realizing it's mostly boiled oats and regret. Still, you smile. Everyone cheers. The physician attributes your survival to his herbal remedies. The nurse says it was her sage rubbing. The bishop claims divine intervention. The juggler says it was the healing power of laughter, despite having not juggled near you once. You personally believe it was the moment Lord Bacon fell off the shelf and hit you on the head. That seemed to reset something vital. In your weakened state, you are given lighter duties. No Latin for a week, no swordplay, just light readings of saintly biographies and meditative staring out the window. You begin narrating your daily observations aloud to the passing birds. They do not respond, but you feel heard. Soon the court declares you restored, though you still sneeze like a startled horse. A small festival is held in your honor. Cakes are baked, most of them uneven. A play is performed in which a young boy, clearly meant to represent you, defeats the great dripping demon with a sneeze that echoes across the kingdom. You laugh so hard, you cough again. You are escorted back to bed. Your first real illness has changed you. You now view handkerchiefs as precious artifacts. You approach suspicious food with more suspicion. And most importantly, you understand, in your strange young way, that being king doesn't make you invincible. It just means when you suffer, everyone pretends it's noble. Years from now, during a siege, you'll tell your soldiers that you once fought a war against your own lungs and won. You'll call it the Battle of the Snot. You'll toast it with warm cider, and your voice will crack from memory. But today, you just sit on your bed, clutching Lord Bacon, sipping thin soup, and wondering quietly whether snails really have healing powers, or whether someone just got tired of them crawling around the herbs. Either way, you survived. The kingdom sighs in relief, and somewhere in the courtyard, a frog hops free from the apothecary's pouch and makes a slow escape into the tall grass, its job miraculously complete. Long live the king. Just not this one. That's the general mood the day your cousin chokes on a fish bone at the midsummer feast, and the line of succession suddenly leaps forward like a startled rabbit. You're 7, perhaps 8. It's hard to tell in a time when birthdays are vague suggestions rather than celebrated certainties. And you're still wiping crumbs on your sleeves when the royal steward clears his throat, looks down at you with squinting reverence, and says the phrase that makes your stomach twist like a badly tied hose. Your Highness, you are now next in line. Until that moment, your cousin, Lord Alaric, first of his name, loud of voice and unpleasant of smell, was the future of the kingdom. A boy of 12 with a chin like an overcooked carrot and a fondness for sneering at your beet-colored shoes. No one really liked him, but everyone agreed he looked the part, especially when posing near tapestries or practicing his smirk in polished shields. And now, thanks to an ambitious bite of pickled pike and a lack of chewing, he is quite suddenly and dramatically gone. The official story is that he perished bravely, clutching his throat and staring toward heaven, as if summoning divine fishmongers. The unofficial version involves 3 nobles trying to slap his back in quick succession and accidentally launching him into a side table. Regardless, the result is the same. Alaric is carried out under a velvet cloth, and you, still licking jam from your fingers, are now regarded with something between awe and dread. They don't crown you right away, of course. That would be improper. There's mourning to do, The chapel bell tolls 19 times. Once for each reason, someone claims they'll miss Alaric. During the funeral, you accidentally sneeze into a ceremonial urn. No one notices. You sit still, watching as banners are lowered, and the kitchen quietly removes all fish from the menu. And then the preparations begin. The kingdom doesn't do casual airs. You're measured for robes. You're handed scrolls full of treaties you can't read, and introduced to men with names like Sir Thistlegroin and Baron Nubble. The court painter is summoned to update your official portrait. This time, your eyes are still slightly cross-eyed, but your crown is larger, your chin slightly heroic, and your pig, Lord Bacon, is replaced by a tiny globe, symbolizing your growing dominion. You miss Lord Bacon terribly. The whispering starts almost immediately. Courtiers lean in dark corridors. Nobles glance sideways. Is he ready? They ask. So small? So curious? Someone describes you as oddly reflective, which in royal terms is dangerously close to might do something unpredictable. You hear none of this. You are busy trying to balance a spoon on your nose, but you do notice the changes. The way people bow slightly lower. The way the cook now places a hand over her heart when serving you pudding. The way guards glance at you, not as a child, but as a symbol. Fragile, essential, imminently coronatable. You find yourself speaking more carefully, standing a little taller, blinking with purpose. Your mother, pale, soft-voiced, always draped in lavender, hugs you a little longer. Your father, previously a fleeting presence, who mostly smelled of horses and vinegar, now lingers at your side during mealtimes, offering advice like, chew everything twice, and never trust a man who quotes poetry while holding a knife. The court astrologer is consulted. He gazes into a cracked basin filled with rainwater and declares that your rise is foretold in the stars. He then slips on a grape and must be carried away with a sprained ankle. The moment, as they say, passes. You begin lessons in diplomacy, mostly involving smiling while people talk too long, and in royal posture, which is surprisingly difficult, with your curved little spine and constant desire to slump like a bean sack. You're also told to memorize the names of 37 nobles and their pets. You remember 3, and one of them is a goose. There are drills too. Emergency drills. What to do if the castle is invaded. How to escape on horseback while wearing silk. When to cry in public. One drill involves hiding under the throne and holding your breath while a servant in disguise yells, "Fire!" You find it exhilarating. You are not supposed to. Then comes the etiquette testing. You're forced to sit through 6 different meals using 6 different sets of utensils. Each spoon looks identical to you. You're expected to tell them apart by aura. You guess wrong every time. One guest calls it charming. Another suggests remedial fork therapy. And of course, the gift givers arrive. Dukes from far-off lands bearing strange cheeses, barons with odd-shaped birds in cages, and an ambassador who offers you a very small elephant made of jade. You thank him by trying to ride it. The elephant breaks. Everyone pretends not to notice. You spend more time in the chapel now, sitting on velvet cushions and listening to sermons about duty, providence, and not being a disappointment. You nod solemnly. You light candles. You sing hymns slightly off-key. Once, You accidentally sing the same line 7 times and are complimented for inventing a new form of chant. Despite it all, you remain at your core a child. You miss rolling in the garden mud. You miss throwing stale bread at the ravens. You miss your pig. But you also begin to sense something grand and terrifying blooming in the air around you. The creeping scent of destiny. It smells faintly of beeswax, ink, and roasted onion. You don't cry when they hang your cousin's portrait in the Hall of Lost Heirs. You just stare at it for a long moment, then quietly whisper, "Should have chewed." Your days grow longer, your nights heavier. You begin to dream of thrones that tilt, of robes that strangle, of crowds that cheer and then vanish. You dream of crowns that bite. And though no one says it outright, everyone now looks at you like a candle in the wind, flickering, fragile, but too important to extinguish. Because you're no longer the quiet child with the odd habits and jam-sticky fingers. You are air. You are next. And every breath you take now echoes through marble halls and musty scrolls, written in the ink of strange fate. Coronation by cow dung and candlelight. It sounds more glamorous than it is, honestly. You, the reluctant heir turned miniature monarch, are all of 9 years old. When the court finally decides it's time to place a slightly too heavy crown on your slightly too small head and declare you officially His Royal Highness, Keeper of the Realm, Defender of the Turnips, Protector of the Southern Hedgeline, and at least 4 other titles, no one understands anymore. The day begins early, as most uncomfortable things do. Before sunrise, servants bustle through the halls, carrying embroidered banners, wilting flowers, and mysterious bundles that smell of musty herbs and damp rope. You're awakened not by gentle song or whispered reverence, but by a maid tripping over a chamber pot and shouting something quite unprintable. You blink blearily and are handed a ceremonial wash basin with petals floating in it, which you accidentally drink. They replace it with actual water. You're bathed with lavender and ash bark, which is meant to purify you, but mostly makes your skin itch. Then dressed in layer upon layer of regal finery, a stiff tunic embroidered with golden thread, a velvet robe that drags behind you like a deflated parade float, and a pair of silk stockings that bunch uncomfortably at the knees. Your shoes are polished to a sheen that reflects your skeptical little face. You look like a decorative pie. Outside, the weather is unfortunate. The sun plays peekaboo with fat grey clouds, and a fine drizzle begins just as the crowd assembles. The field chosen for your coronation, a hallowed patch of land, allegedly blessed by a long-dead saint who once tamed a particularly angry donkey, turns to mud almost instantly. The wooden platform, lovingly constructed from planks of questionable stability, begins to sag in the middle. Somewhere in the distance, a cow bellows in protest. You are carried through the courtyard on a litter draped with brocade, your eyes wide, your knees knocking gently as you bounce with each uneven step. Villagers line the path, cheering without much enthusiasm. Some wave, one throws a turnip. You wave back, uncertain whether it was a gift or a statement. As the procession reaches the coronation field, things take a turn. Quite literally. One of the litter bearers slips in a patch of freshly deposited cow dung, and your entire royal body lurches sideways. You do not fall, but your crown does. It bounces off your head, hits a priest, and lands upside down in the mud. A courtier gasps, another faints. You suppress a giggle. The crown is retrieved, wiped with someone's sleeve, and placed back on your head, slightly askew. The archbishop, a man with trembling hands and a voice like boiling cabbage, begins the sacred rites. He chants, he waves incense, he recites the long list of royal ancestors who mostly died in unfortunate ways. Stabbings, fevers, being mistaken for someone else, or in one case, falling into a well while dancing. You try to look solemn, but are distracted by a beetle climbing your shoe. Then comes the anointing. You kneel awkwardly because your knees are still recovering from the fall. And he smears your forehead with oil that smells like old garlic and warm honey. You're told to close your eyes and receive the blessing of kings. You do, but you also sneeze spectacularly, coating the front of the archbishop's robe in a fine mist of royalty. He nods grimly and continues. At last, the crown is raised, again, and placed atop your head while the crowd murmurs, the sky threatens more rain, and the choir begins a shaky version of the royal anthem, Long may he reign, as long as he doesn't trip. You are now king. Technically, sort of. The regents will still do all the actual work until you're older. But from this moment forward, everyone must bow, scrape, and pretend your opinions matter. A great feast is held back at the castle. You're seated on a throne far too large for your body, and given a golden goblet of watered wine, which you promptly spill on your tunic. No one comments. Instead, dishes are paraded before you. Roast boar with apples, eels in jelly, candied dates, and a mystery pudding that glows slightly in the dark. You poke it with your spoon. It quivers. You move on. The jester performs a series of acrobatic leaps, one of which ends with him face first in a pie. Everyone laughs. You try to laugh too, but your robe is too tight, and you're pretty sure one of your new leather shoes has a pebble in it. Nobles toast your name with increasing enthusiasm and decreasing clarity. A bard composes a spontaneous ballad, rhyming your name with kingly bling and springtime zing. You consider exiling him. Later that evening, as the fires burn low and the guests snore into their wine cups, you sit in your private chambers, still wearing half your coronation garb. The crown rests on your lap. It's heavier than you expected. Not just in weight, but in implication. You stare at your reflection in a polished goblet and wonder if you look any different now. You don't. Your tutor arrives with a scroll and announces that your first official duty will be reviewing the revised tariffs on imported carrots. You blink. You ask if there will be more pies. He says no. You sigh, and so ends your coronation day, not with thunderous fanfare or triumphant fireworks, but with sore feet, sticky robes, and a vague feeling that the grown-ups might be making all of this up as they go. You're king now. The mud on your shoe says so. The aching crown marks the spot. And the cow who witnessed it all. She still hasn't blinked. The jester slips on a goose and dies. That's how your 8th month as king begins. No royal edict, no treaty negotiations, no ceremonial planting of commemorative trees. Just a loud honk a shriek, and the sound of bells scattering across the great hall floor as the kingdom's most colorful entertainer goes airborne over a particularly irritable goose and lands, tragically, poetically, fatally, on his own lute. It happens during the midwinter banquet, just as you're beginning to enjoy your third honey tart, and wondering if it's acceptable for a king to excuse himself to scratch his leg under the table. The jester, a wiry man known as Fennel, had been juggling 4 candlesticks and a loaf of bread while hopping on one foot and reciting a rhyme about court taxes. It was going rather well, until the goose. No one is entirely sure how the goose got into the hall. Some say it belonged to the cook. Others claim it wandered in from the stable, lured by the scent of roast turnips. Either way, Fennel never saw it coming. He stepped backward, slipped dramatically, let out a final "ho!" of surprise, and came crashing down, knocking over a goblet of mulled wine and smashing his instrument in 2. The lute, not the goose. The goose simply walked away, feathers slightly ruffled, dignity intact. A stunned silence follows. The banquet hall freezes, as if waiting for the punchline. You, seated on your velvet-cushioned throne, mouth slightly open mid-bite, look around for someone to declare it part of the act. No one does. The bishop mutters a prayer. A lady faints quietly into her pudding. One of the guards coughs and says, "Well, that's unfortunate." The jester is quickly and gently covered with a tablecloth that bears a faint gravy stain, shaped like a duck. For the next hour, no one is sure what to do. Is the feast cancelled? Should you make a speech? Does this mean geese are now banned from the palace grounds? Eventually, your steward clears his throat and announces that the entertainment will continue with a performance from the royal harpist. The harpist is still chewing and panics slightly. You nod anyway. The music is tentative. In the following days, the jester's death becomes the stuff of uncomfortable legend. No one wants to joke about it, but also, no one can stop. Whispers float through the corridors. He died as he lived. Too fast, too funny, and too close to poultry. You overhear a servant say that the goose has cursed blood. Someone else suggests that Fennel had always been one pratfall from prophecy. A monk draws an illuminated letter shaped like a goose in that week's official chronicles. You pretend not to notice. The funeral is small and odd. Fennel is buried with his bells and a spare pair of shoes that squeak when shaken. You attend, dressed in formal mourning robes, dyed the deepest shade of somber purple. You speak only one sentence. He was very bendy. This is recorded by the royal scribe as a moving tribute. The court nods in solemn agreement. Without a jester, the palace becomes eerily quiet. No more lute twangs from behind doors, no sudden cartwheels through the banquet line, no juggling of questionable fruit. You find yourself missing Fennel's chaotic presence more than expected, especially since he was the only one who ever dared to throw pie at your tutor and survive. For a while, you consider promoting Lord Bacon, your stuffed pig, to court fool, but the advisors say it would raise uncomfortable questions. A search for a new jester begins. A dozen candidates are brought before you. One performs somersaults while singing about taxation. Another recites your lineage backward while balancing a cabbage on his head. One woman simply stares at you for 30 seconds, says, "You're doomed," and walks out. You don't hire her, but you do think about her often. Eventually, a new fool is selected. His name is Plum. He wears green tights, has a slightly terrifying smile, and honks a brass horn for emphasis after every sentence. He's not nearly as funny as Fennel, but he is incredibly bendy, and he refuses to perform near geese. Meanwhile, the incident prompts a minor wave of goose-related legislation. Livestock are banned from ceremonial chambers. The moat is checked for rogue poultry. A short-lived fashion trend of feathered collars is quietly cancelled. You, however, secretly commission a tiny golden goose charm and wear it on a chain under your tunic. As a reminder, or perhaps as a warning, you begin to notice something about ruling. It's less about grand battles and noble decrees, and more about what happens when someone dies unexpectedly in front of a full audience. It's about how you react when life throws a goose under your entertainer. It's about dignity, even while your court stifles laughter during a memorial hymn. A month later, on the first day of spring, you declare an official day of merriment in Fennel's honor. There is juggling, there are honey tarts. The new jester performs admirably, although he does slip once on a rogue apple peel. You nearly have a heart attack. He recovers, everyone claps. The goose is not invited. That night, you sit by the hearth with Lord Bacon, crown slightly askew, and stare into the fire. You wonder, not for the first time, how many kings have lost jesters to livestock. You suspect it's more than one, and as the embers crackle and your eyelids grow heavy, you whisper to the stuffed pig beside you. We need better floor inspections, crusades, crossbows, and camel spit. That's the summary of your first official military campaign, though none of that was exactly what you expected. By the time you're 10 and a half, an age your regents decide is both symbolically noble and tactically deniable, you're informed that you will be participating in a holy expedition eastward, known dramatically as the 9th or possibly 10th Crusade, depending on how you count. They tell you it's to bring glory to the kingdom. You suspect it's to get you out of the castle for a while. Either way, you're given a tiny sword, a dented helmet, and a warning: don't touch the scorpions. You ask what a scorpion is. They hand you a diagram. You cry for an hour. The journey begins with great fanfare. Banners waving, trumpets blowing, knights sweating in full armor as they mount reluctant horses. You ride a pony named Harold, who hates you, the sunlight, and the very concept of movement. Harold trots sideways most of the first week. You are told this is tactical evasion. Crossbows are handed out to your personal guard, along with stern lectures about not pointing them at other guards, even as a joke. One noble accidentally fires his into a barrel of salted herring. The herring are unharmed but offended. Your entourage consists of 20 soldiers, 3 priests, a falconer, 2 scribes, 4 cooks, 1 man who claims to be your uncle, he's not, and a translator who speaks 5 languages but refuses to speak before noon. Somewhere along the route, 2 minstrels join the group and immediately begin composing songs about your shining brow and courageous yawns. You do yawn a lot. Marching is dull. The terrain shifts as the days stretch on. Grasslands become dusty plains, forests thin into scrubby hills, and the air grows thick with the scent of distant spices and sweat. Your armor becomes increasingly decorative. You abandon the helmet after it traps a lizard inside, which you name Clarence, before setting him free. You keep the sword, mostly to poke at unfamiliar fruit. The first real battle you witness is entirely accidental. Your forces arrive at a small town expecting rest, only to find it already occupied by someone else's crusade. Words are exchanged, then loaves of bread, then arrows you hide under a cart. The battle lasts 27 minutes. Casualties include 1 tent, 2 pies, and the patience of the bishop, who is struck in the posterior by a wayward javelin. He refuses to sit for 3 days. You're not allowed to fight, of course. But that doesn't stop everyone from pretending you are. Tales spread quickly. One says you charged into enemy lines, wielding a flaming banner. Another insists you saved a fallen knight with a single, perfectly placed pebble. In truth, you spent most of the skirmish trying to keep Harold from chewing your sleeve. Then come the camels. You encounter them just beyond a trading post, tied to stakes and looking generally unamused. You're introduced to one named Ozymandias, who immediately sneezes on your face with the force of a miniature hurricane. Camel spit, you learn, is both voluminous and unforgettable. You smell like fermented oats for 2 days. A knight tries to console you by saying it's a sign of respect. You are unconvinced. Your entourage swells as your fame grows. Foreign dignitaries appear, bow deeply, and present strange gifts. A jar of preserved lemons, a feather fan made from the tail of an exotic bird, a musical instrument that sounds like a goose being tickled. You nod, thank them, and promptly hide most of the items under your bedroll. You keep the lemon jar. It smells safe. The translator becomes useful after the group gets lost for 3 days in a dry valley full of rocks shaped like noses. You rely on his guidance and his morning grunts. When asked where you are, he simply shrugs and says, "Further." No one questions him. Food changes too. Bread becomes flat. Meat arrives on skewers. Everything is dusted with mysterious spices that make your nose tingle and your ears itch. You develop a fondness for one particular stew until a goat eats your bowl. You mourn the bowl, not the goat. The campaign grows stranger with time. One morning, you wake to find a rival knight challenging your cook to a duel over soup rights. Another evening, you witness a tent collapse during a sermon and remain collapsed as the bishop continues preaching from inside the canvas. No one helps him out. He finishes the sermon in total darkness. There's a brief diplomatic meeting with the local sultan, who gives you a small dagger inlaid with turquoise and an unreadable smile. You give him a drawing of Lord Bacon. He seems deeply confused, but thanks you anyway. Eventually, the army turns homeward. You have acquired a sunburn shaped like a spoon, a vague understanding of military hierarchy, and an unhealthy obsession with fig jam. On the return march, you are hailed as a crusading hero, despite having never raised your sword higher than waist height. Songs are sung. One refers to you as the Golden Prince of the Sneeze. You don't correct it. Back at the castle, the court welcomes you with cautious enthusiasm. You are now slightly taller, tanned in a patchy, unfortunate way, and full of new knowledge about camels, dust, and the digestive speed of military rations. A tapestry is commissioned to commemorate your crusade. It shows you on horseback, dramatically leading a charge. Harold is nowhere to be seen. You do not correct that either. In private, you unpack your souvenirs: the dagger, the lemon jar, the broken feather fan, and a small, sun-bleached rock shaped vaguely like a duck. You place them beside Lord Bacon. You whisper tales of adventure to your stuffed companion and sigh. You've been to war, or close enough to smell it, and returned with all your limbs and only minor emotional scarring. You now understand that crusades are less about glory and more about blisters, flies, and watching noblemen argue over who gets to ride the only mule with a working saddle. Still, you survived. Again. And history, you suspect, will improve the story in retelling. The siege that lasted until everyone forgot why begins with a trumpet blast and ends many months later with two opposing generals playing dice under a makeshift tent and arguing over the rules of the game. You, by this time, an experienced child king of 11 3/4, find yourself at the center of one of history's most directionless military standoffs. It is, as your tutor eventually records, a campaign of tremendous duration and minimal outcome. It starts with a border dispute, or maybe a marriage contract gone sour, or perhaps someone insulted someone else's goat. No one can quite remember. The important thing is that your kingdom's noble advisors decide that Castle Thistlehelm, a grey lump of stone perched inconveniently on a windy hill, is a threat to national pride and must be surrounded until it either surrenders, falls, or apologizes. You are not expected to lead the siege, of course. You are, however, expected to appear at key moments, wave regally from a tent, and eat roasted root vegetables from a silver dish while looking mildly concerned. You do this well. Thistlehelm is a fortress of moderate size and exceptional stubbornness. Its defenders raise the drawbridge on the first day and then proceed to do very little. They do not fire arrows. They do not sally forth. They simply stand on the battlements and stare. Occasionally, one of them waves. It's unclear whether this is a taunt or a greeting. You wave back, just to be polite. Your forces, meanwhile, build a series of impressive wooden siege engines, most of which collapse during testing or are immediately stolen by local children who turn them into playgrounds. A catapult misfires and launches a barrel of salted turnips directly into the moat. One soldier dives in after it. He is promoted for bravery. Tents are pitched, latrines are dug, supplies are gathered. You are given a small pavilion decorated with your royal colors, sun-faded blue and mustard yellow, and a stool that squeaks when you shift your weight. You begin keeping a tally of every time someone uses the word morale. It comes up a lot. The first month passes with mild enthusiasm. Drills are conducted, songs are sung. Someone writes a motivational speech titled, "Victory is nigh," or at least nearby. You hear it 12 times. Each version gets shorter. By month 2, enthusiasm has dipped. The cook runs out of onions. The water barrels begin to smell like boiled wool. The falconers' birds go on strike. Your soldiers, faced with overwhelming boredom, start forming clubs. The Siege Soup Society, the Brotherhood of Boredom, and one group devoted entirely to sculpting rude statues from turnips. You do not endorse them, but you do visit the turnip gallery. It's surprisingly moving. Attempts to communicate with the castle fail. A messenger is sent with a white flag and a plate of buttered scones. He returns with a politely worded note. "We're fine, thank you." A week later, the defenders drop a basket over the wall filled with knitted mittens. It's unclear whether this is a peace offering or a sign of overconfidence. The mittens are warm. To boost morale, you order the construction of a wooden stage. Plays are performed. One features a heroic king who defeats an enemy by staring at them very hard. You play yourself in the performance. Critics call it unsettlingly lifelike. The stage collapses halfway through Act 2. By month 4, no one remembers what sparked the siege. Your general suggests escalating. "What if we throw beehives?" he asks. You nod, intrigued. The beehives are procured. The bees, however, are not cooperative. One hive explodes prematurely. Several soldiers flee into the woods, pursued by tiny buzzing vengeance. The beehive plan is quietly shelved. The 5th month brings unexpected frost. The soldiers knit scarves. You host a snowball tournament. Someone builds a snowman, shaped like the archbishop. He's not amused. The defenders, for their part, build snowmen of their own. Larger, more elaborate, one even wearing a crown. You're impressed. Tensions reach a low point when both sides throw cabbages at each other for an entire afternoon. It is not strategic, but it is cathartic. The field smells faintly of coleslaw for weeks. As spring approaches, the nobles grow restless. A formal council is held to discuss next steps. You listen patiently as 20 different lords argue over tactics, honor, and supply chain efficiency. After an hour, you raise your hand and ask, "What if we just stop?" The silence is profound. Then someone coughs. Then someone nods. The siege ends the next morning. You ride up to the castle gates. They creak open. A handful of defenders emerge, blinking at the sunlight, arms full of biscuits. You exchange pleasantries. They admit they weren't even sure if they were under siege or just being ignored. You invite them to a picnic. They bring jam. The official record declares the siege a patient demonstration of royal resilience. You prefer to call it the Great Standoff of Shared Confusion. A tapestry is commissioned. It depicts you standing nobly atop a hill, hand-raised in command, as soldiers below juggle root vegetables. You request that Lord Bacon be included in the scene. The artist agrees. Back at the castle, you're welcomed as a hero. Children throw flowers. Nobles throw compliments. The cook throws out a barrel of spoiled beets. You return to your chambers with sunburned cheeks, 2 pine cones you found during a scouting walk, and a knitted mitten from the defenders. That night, you sit in your bath, humming a victory tune of your own invention. You survived another chapter of your strange, meandering rule. You laid siege to a castle, forgot the reason, made some mittens, and left with your dignity, mostly intact. It may not be how stories of kings are usually written, but then again, you were never a usual king, killed by cheese. nearly. That's how the story would have ended if the palace kitchen's favorite monk hadn't sneezed at precisely the right moment. It begins innocently enough. You're 12, nearly 13, and slowly becoming the kind of king who is expected to enjoy lavish banquets without fear of sudden dairy-related demise. But as you will come to learn, even the softest of cheeses may conceal sharp intentions, or at least a little mold and malicious planning. The occasion is a minor holiday, something involving a saint who once turned a lake into soup. No one really remembers the details, but it's a good excuse for music, dancing, and a menu designed to impress your visiting cousin from the Western Duchy. A tall, flaxen-haired boy with polished boots and a smile full of horse teeth. His name is Baldwin, and you do not trust him. The feast includes roasted quail, sugared walnuts, mead with suspicious fizz, and at the end, the pièce de résistance, a platter of soft, creamy cheese said to be imported from an alpine monastery, where monks sing hymns to the gods before milking them. The cheese arrives with great ceremony, resting on a silver tray, garnished with rosemary sprigs and a single violet flower. The room sighs in admiration. You're not overly fond of cheese, but the court leans forward expectantly. So, you reach for a slice, cut a modest wedge, and lift it to your lips. Enter Brother Theobald, the kitchen's spiritual advisor and part-time taster, who has a habit of sneezing whenever danger is near, or whenever he forgets he's allergic to flowers. He arrives late, robes slightly smoky from an incident involving roast apples, and just as your teeth graze the cheese, he lets loose an almighty sneeze, so powerful it knocks your cup from the table and startles a hound into yelping. In that split second, your hand slips. The cheese tumbles from your fingers, landing with a sad plop on your velvet sleeve. At first, everyone freezes. Then someone, perhaps your cousin, perhaps the steward, mutters, "Maybe that's for the best." You raise an eyebrow. The cupbearer turns pale. The platter is removed. The flower is examined. A silent alarm passes through the room like a shiver. The cheese is taken away by the apothecary, who pokes it with a pewter stick and sniffs. He declares it ambiguous. This is not comforting. You are ushered away from the table and into your private chamber, where your physician insists on giving you a sip of something bitter and green just in case. You suspect it's more for his peace of mind than your stomach. Meanwhile, the platter of cheese is subjected to various medieval tests, dropped in water, exposed to fire, and finally fed to a duck. The duck explodes, figuratively. It merely flaps away in horror and refuses to return. Still, the message is clear. The cheese was suspicious at best, treasonous at worst. Rumors swirl. Was it your cousin? Was it a disgruntled cheese merchant? Was it that mysterious nun who always hums off-key? You're assigned 2 new food tasters, both of whom take their jobs seriously and carry their own forks. Every dish is now pierced, sniffed, and occasionally sung to before being served. For days, the castle becomes obsessed with dairy. All cheese is banned. Butter is eyed with suspicion. Milk is boiled twice before drinking. A child is caught trying to smuggle in a wedge of goat cheddar and is sentenced to 3 hours of quiet reflection in the library. You begin to develop an irrational fear of wheels. Not cartwheels, those are fine, but cheese wheels, the roundness, the potential. You start dreaming of giant wheels of cheese rolling down castle corridors, chasing you slowly but relentlessly. You wake in a cold sweat, vowing to trust only hard breads from now on. Eventually, the incident is labeled an accidental culinary misfortune, though your steward quietly insists it was an attempted regicide. A royal proclamation is drafted forbidding all foreign dairy, without a sacred blessing and one sneeze, which becomes a new palace motto, embroidered on the kitchen curtains. Brother Theobald becomes a minor hero. His sneeze is commemorated in a mural just outside the pantry, where he's depicted mid-sneeze, mouth agape, hand raised dramatically. You reward him with a warm cloak and a small stipend to buy less sneezy flowers. Your cousin Baldwin, meanwhile, becomes exceedingly polite. He offers you food at every meal with an enthusiasm that is suspicious in its own right. One day, you catch him offering a slice of pie to a cat. The cat sniffs it, snarls, and bolts. You make a note. You learn a lesson, though you're not entirely sure what it is. Perhaps it's that royalty is as much about avoiding cheese as it is about wielding swords. Or maybe it's that sometimes the only thing standing between you and an embarrassing obituary is a monk with hay fever. Either way, you survive. Again. And the next feast, held 2 weeks later in honor of completely unrelated matters, features no cheese at all. Just bread, fruit, and a very nervous roast duck. You raise your goblet, filled only with water, and give a toast. To Brother Theobald, the guardian of my gut. The court cheers. And from the shadows, a small mouse nibbles silently on an unclaimed wedge of cheese, unaware that it too might be a footnote in a story that nearly ended much, much too early. The plague sends you into hiding, of course. That's just what one does when people begin collapsing in marketplaces and coughing blood into their soup. You're 13 now, no longer the squeaky child of yesteryears, but still much too young to be making kingdom-wide proclamations. And yet, when the first bell tolls from the town square and a rider gallops in foaming at the mouth, not from illness, but sheer panic, it's your signature that approves the lockdown. They call it the sweating season, though no one's sure if the sweat is a symptom or just the universal response to doom. Whispers swirl through the palace like smoke, a sickness from the coast, sailors dropping mid-sentence, whole families vanishing into silence. The court physicians immediately suggest bleeding everyone, just in case. You decline, politely. By the third day, the castle gates are closed, the drawbridge lifted, and the kitchens stockpile turnips like they're gold. You are whisked away, not too dramatically, but with just enough fuss to make you feel like a tragic opera character. Into the royal tower on the far edge of the grounds. The High Chamberlain calls it a precaution. The bishop calls it divine quarantine. You call it lonely. The tower is tall, round, slightly draughty, and designed more for penance than comfort. You are accompanied by 3 hand-picked companions. Your tutor, grim as ever, a nurse named Magda, who constantly smells of vinegar, And your royal astrologer, who insists on bringing 12 suitcases, mostly filled with dried apples and horoscopes. And then there are the cats, 37 of them to be exact. No one knows exactly where they came from. Perhaps some were pets, others strays. One might be a minor noble under a curse. Regardless, by the end of the first week, your tower has become a feline republic. They lounge on windowsills, parade across your writing desk, and sleep in curious pyramids on your bed. You name 24: Lord Fluffington, Sir Scratch-a-lot, Archbishop Hairball, Duchess of Tuna. They do not listen when called. For entertainment, you're given books, yet mostly sermons, histories, and a treatise on cabbage varieties. You read half of one and fall asleep for 9 hours. Magda teaches you how to sew crooked embroidery, and for a week, you attempt to stitch a heroic scene of you defeating the plague with a single cough. It ends up looking like you're sneezing on a sheep. The astrologer is convinced the stars foretold this crisis. He charts nightly, peers into a cracked mirror, and once attempts to divine your future from the pattern of crumbs under your breakfast plate. Uncertain, he says every time. Possibly damp. Meals are delivered by rope and pulley, hauled up from the kitchens in a wicker basket. You once received 3 stews and no spoons. Another time, just spoons. Once, inexplicably, a live chicken. You name it Count Cluckles and let it roam the upper stairs. It poops on your pillow. You remain civil. The days blur. Rain taps on the windows endlessly. The wind howls like a sorrowful aunt. You count the cats daily just to make sure they haven't unionized. You write bad poetry and hide it behind the fireplace. You try to teach Lord Fluffington to fetch. He teaches you that he has claws. Outside, the world dims. You hear the occasional bell from the chapel down in the village, tolling with eerie regularity. News comes slowly, scribbled on notes pinned to the food basket. Market closed, baker sneezed. Bishop developing rash. Barber now doing leeches, only by window. You begin to wonder, what sort of king hides in a tower while his people suffer? You feel the weight of your crown more now, even though you've stopped wearing it. Too heavy for these stone floors, too cold on your hair. You speak to your reflection one night and ask yourself, would I die for them? The reflection doesn't answer. It only blinks. But you're not idle. You draft letters. You order supplies sent to the village. You commission the production of more vinegar and soap. You ask the weavers to make masks, cloth ones sewn with talismans, because no one knows if it helps, but it feels like doing something. You sign orders with shaking fingers, wondering if your ink-stained hand will be remembered kindly or cursed forever. Then one evening, a note arrives. The bells have stopped. You stare at the words for a long time. Then you lie on the floor, surrounded by cats, and whisper their names like a spell. And slowly, painfully slowly, the bells begin again. This time, not to mourn, but to mark the turning of the tide. Weeks pass. A cautious knock at the tower door. A voice. Your Majesty? The village lives. You descend the steps for the first time in months. Your legs protest. Your crown is polished, but you leave it in your hand. You step into the courtyard, blinking like a mole at sunlight. And the people, thin, tired, tearful, bow to you. Not because you fought a battle, not because you passed a law, but because you stayed, sent what you could, remembered their names, and because, even through the fog of sickness and fear, your tower window always glowed with light at night. The cats stay in the tower, a local legend now. People visit to leave bits of fish at the door. You, however, return to the throne, wiser, quieter, and forever allergic to rosemary and astrologers who read soup crumbs. You're nearly felled, not by sword, plague, or betrayal, but by your own crown, which decides, one bright spring morning, to attempt assassination via blunt trauma. It begins, as all ridiculous royal incidents do, with ceremony. A new statue is being unveiled in the city square. One of you, naturally, riding a horse that you've never actually ridden, wearing armor you've never worn, and wielding a sword large enough to slice reality. It's heroic, overdone, and anatomically confusing. The sculptor insists the proportions are symbolic. You privately refer to the horse as Sir Leg Day. To commemorate the occasion, the palace orders a new crown. Lighter, more elegant, with delicately wrought arches, an emerald at the brow, and a hidden mechanism that allows it to be adjusted for your growing skull. It is presented to you on a velvet pillow, and you, in your wisdom, place it on your own head without a second thought. The problem is it wasn't quite finished. The crown, designed by a well-meaning but overly enthusiastic goldsmith, features decorative gilded spikes, 8 of them, sharp as soup spoons, dipped in sarcasm, rising upward in what he called radiant geometry, and everyone else called, possibly, aggressive headwear. You try to look pleased as you stand atop the palace balcony, waving at the assembled crowd, sun shining, doves released, fanfare playing. The music swells, then a pigeon veers left. Startled, you turn your head too quickly. The crown shifts, tilts. One of the spikes digs neatly into your scalp. You wince, flinch, and take a single dramatic step backward, directly into the bronze stand holding the royal parasol. It topples. The parasol collapses like a dying jellyfish. You try to maintain composure, but the crown lurches forward again, and this time, you yelp. Gasps erupt below. Several ministers rush forward. A trumpet squeals off-key. You stagger forward, blinking, the spike now tangled in your hair. A lady in waiting shrieks and faints. The royal juggler drops all 5 eggs he was balancing. One lands in your boot. Eventually, you're led back inside, bleeding slightly, dignity trailing behind you like an embarrassed dog. The crown is removed with the aid of 3 footmen, a silver fork, and an apology letter from the goldsmith, who is already halfway to the port. The injury is minor, a shallow puncture, and some bruised scalp. But the drama, oh, it's historic. The court physician insists on bandaging your entire head for safety, and you end up looking like a pastry wrapped in linen. A painter is summoned to capture the moment for posterity. You request that he omit the egg. For the next week, your injury becomes the subject of every conversation in the kingdom. Bards compose ballads with titles like The Crown That Bit Back and The Spike That Loved Too Much. A local puppet show reenacts the event using a chicken feather and a walnut. The royal astronomer declares that the stars were in ironic alignment. You issue a public statement. The crown and I are currently taking time apart. In the meantime, your advisors scramble to redesign the headpiece. One suggests a softer material, perhaps padded velvet. Another proposes a floating crown, suspended by wires and tiny bells. A third simply slides a metal bowl over your head and calls it a day. You consider appointing him Minister of Practicality. Your court, however, takes the incident very seriously. Rumors begin to swirl. Was it sabotage? A message from the gods? A curse left behind by your recently exiled cousin Baldwin? He still writes weekly letters, mostly about how disappointed he is in your handwriting. A priest is summoned to bless all royal regalia with holy water and several muttered incantations. One hat bursts into flames. They quietly retire the bishop's ceremonial mitre. Despite the chaos, you carry on. You still attend council meetings, albeit with a soft velvet cap in place of your usual crown. You still listen to disputes over wheat tariffs and the ethics of goat parades. You still visit the kitchens to demand extra jam on your toast. Because that's what kings do. They endure. Privately, though, you reflect. The crown had always been symbolic. Weighty, yes, but never dangerous. And yet, here it was. Sharp, unstable, ready to skewer its wearer at the slightest misstep. You wonder if that's the real metaphor everyone keeps ignoring, because being king means standing straight while balancing something ridiculous and painful on your head, hoping no one notices when it wobbles. It means smiling through the jabs, literal and political, and pretending that the spike currently lodged in your hair is, in fact, a fashion choice. Eventually you recover. Your hair grows back. A new crown is forged, sleeker, spike-free, more circlet than sculpture. It fits snugly, like it was made for someone wiser, someone who knows better than to look up suddenly during ceremonies. And when you next appear in public, there is no wind, no birds, no parasols, just you, your simpler crown, and a knowing smile. You wave, the people cheer, and in the distance, a pigeon flaps by. You flinch, just a little, death by bathroom accident. That's the legend anyway. And while many tales of kings end in glorious battle or mysterious vanishing, yours nearly ends with an unfortunate tumble into the royal latrine on a rainy Tuesday. It begins innocently enough, as many near-mortal embarrassments do, with a heavy meal, a sudden storm, and a misplaced torch. You're 14, a seasoned monarch by now, capable of drafting trade agreements, settling disputes about whose goat wandered into whose garden, and surviving elaborate feasts featuring unidentifiable poultry. But digestion, alas, cares little for diplomacy. The banquet had gone long, roast boar, spiced pears, a troubling casserole referred to only as the Duchess's delight. You ate modestly, but the stewed plums proved persuasive. Afterward, as thunder rumbled and the court dispersed, you made your way to the South Tower's privy chamber, alone, unaccompanied, like a commoner. It was meant to be a quiet, anonymous moment. The royal latrine, you see, is not some humble outhouse. No. It is a stone structure affixed to the castle wall, several floors above the moat, perched perilously over the side, like an architectural afterthought. A carved bench with a hole, a narrow window, and a torch bracket on the wall. Simple, effective, and, on rainy nights, exceptionally treacherous. You step inside. The wind howls through the cracks. The torch flickers, casting uneven shadows. You reach to pull the door closed. Your slipper skids on something slick. Moss, perhaps, or the damp aftermath of the cook's unsteady apprentice. And suddenly, the floor tilts. You fall. Not into the pit, thankfully. No, fate spares you that. You fall sideways, flailing, crown slipping down over your eyes, one leg caught on the bench, the other flailing into the air like a startled flamingo. Your elbow smacks the wall. Your royal backside hits the floor. The torch clatters loose and extinguishes itself in a puff of damp smoke. You lay there, stunned, in total darkness. Somewhere far below, the rain splashes into the moat. You hear distant lute music drifting up from the great hall. No one knows you're here. No one saw you fall. You attempt to rise. Your robes are tangled. You groan, softly, like a wounded sheep. The bench creaks ominously beside you. This, you think, is how legends die. But then, salvation. A knock on the outer wall. Your Majesty? It's the night steward, a man with ears like soup ladles and the gift of inconvenient timing. He'd come to light incense, apparently, to improve the room's ambiance. You croak a reply. He rushes in, sees you sprawled like a dramatic potato and gasps. Naturally, he tells everyone. By morning, the entire castle knows that you were discovered, crumpled in the kingly closet. The tale grows in the telling. Some say you slipped on soap. Others claim a rat startled you. One particularly poetic version involves a ghost monk and a cursed roll of parchment. You insist on issuing a royal decree banning moss near latrines. The gardeners protest. The bishop offers to bless the floor. A carpenter installs a railing, and a padded seat is suggested for comfort and safety. You nod solemnly. A few days later, a court poet presents a new composition titled His Majesty's Most Noble Descent. You ban it? It becomes wildly popular. And yet, once the bruises fade, you begin to find it funny. Just a little. You make subtle jokes in council meetings. Let's not slip up again, you'll say. And your chancellor will quietly cough into his sleeve. Still, the incident sticks. You are now that king, the one who fought off invaders, survived poisoned cheese, outwitted a plague, and nearly died pants down in a rain-slicked privy. You are the whisper behind giggles in the kitchens. The cautionary tale told to young squires, remember your footing, or you'll end up like King Almost. To reclaim some dignity, you commission a new robe, deep burgundy, embroidered with the royal crest, lined with fur. Practical, yes, but also symbolic. A reminder, perhaps, that even the mightiest monarch can fall if the floor is slippery enough. You also begin a strange new ritual. Once a month, you visit the tower latrine alone, light a fresh torch, sit for precisely 5 minutes, and emerge without incident. Each time you nod at the guard stationed nearby, as if to say, still here, still dry. Eventually the court moves on. New dramas unfold, tax protests, a minor dragon sighting, a dispute over whether dancing on Wednesdays is sinful. The bathroom incident becomes history, a funny footnote, a lesson in humility carved into your reign. And you? You remain seated firmly on your throne, the proper one. And if anyone snickers when you excuse yourself, you smile because you know what they don't. You survived the fall, and no pigeon, crown spike, or slippery bench will ever get the better of you again. Not dead yet. They embalm you anyway. That's the next act in your increasingly improbable royal life. And possibly the most surreal chapter of all. You're 15 now, tallish, moderately regal, with a voice that sometimes cracks during speeches and a growing appreciation for soft chairs. You've survived food poisoning, battle-adjacent adventures, airborne jesters, and a latrine incident whispered of in kitchens for miles. But nothing prepares you for the strange sensation of waking up during your own funeral preparations. It begins, as most dramatic misunderstandings do, with a nap. You're exhausted. Late nights reading dull treaties, long days spent nodding thoughtfully while your advisors debate turnip tariffs. One evening, after sipping a particularly strong herbal tonic, intended to soothe nerves and possibly remove freckles, you retreat to your chambers and drift into a sleep so deep and dreamless that no one can rouse you. You do not stir at dawn. You do not react to the bells. You do not open your eyes. Even when the physician pokes your foot with a fork and declares your pulse uncooperative. The court panics, the nurse wails, the astrologer faints, the bishop begins singing softly under his breath. An emergency council is held. A second physician is brought in. He sniffs your breath, pinches your cheeks, and finally nods solemnly. The king has left this realm. There is silence, a moment of mourning, and then action. You are lifted gently, reverently, and carried to the royal antechamber where all noble bodies are prepared for state display. A special table is laid out, lined with fine linen. Flowers are scattered. Candles are lit. Someone begins composing a dirge. Your cousin, who has been waiting for this moment since the cheese incident, begins practicing his acceptance speech. Meanwhile, your loyal embalmer, Brother Anselm, a thin man with round spectacles and a voice like a whisper in a library, sets about his task. He's done this many times. Nobles, priests. That one goat who held a ceremonial title. He's calm, efficient, almost too calm. He applies fragrant oils to your wrists. He begins packing your nose with lavender and something called holy dust. You twitch. He pauses. He stares. You twitch again. He gasps. His Majesty just flinched. He whispers. A maid faints. Anselm leans closer, peering into your apparently lifeless face. Your eyelid flutters. He screams. You wake to chaos. Candles crashing, people shrieking, a confused bishop tossing holy water everywhere. You sit up, blinking at the swirl of incense and incomprehensible shouting. Your mouth tastes like thyme and beeswax. Someone yells, "He's risen!" Someone else yells, "Was he a ghost all along?" You, still foggy from your nap, say the only words you can manage. Why does my nose smell like furniture? It takes hours to calm the court. The dirge is cancelled, the cousin's speech is burned, the mourning banners are taken down. You are declared miraculously restored, though the bishop insists it was his prayers that did it. The apothecary blames the tonic. The cat knocks over an urn of rose water. No one knows what's going on anymore. You, still dazed, are put back to bed and guarded for 3 nights straight. Servants check your breathing every hour. You begin leaving handwritten notes on your pillow. Still alive. Please stop poking me. The incident changes you. You begin to question everything. Your health, your staff, your kingdom's alarming eagerness to embalm. You hold long meetings about medical competency. You request a written guide titled How to Tell If the King is Dead and What to Do if You're Wrong. It becomes mandatory reading. To prevent future confusion, you commission a bell to be tied to your wrist during sleep. If it jingles, you're breathing. If it doesn't, wait 5 minutes and check again. The palace grows used to the soft chime of your nighttime turns. The cats don't like it. You don't care. Brother Anselm, deeply apologetic, offers to resign. You refuse. Instead, you promote him. Anyone brave enough to nearly embalm me and still fold my laundry with care, you say, deserves a raise. The event also inspires a short-lived religious movement. Pilgrims visit the room where you returned. Someone bottles the leftover oils and sells them as king's breath. They smell mostly of rosemary and panic. For months afterward, nobles greet you with wide eyes and forced smiles. One brave soul asks if you saw the light. You say yes. It was a candle. He doesn't laugh. You do. You make jokes now. Dark ones, dry ones. During speeches, you'll pause, lean on the podium, and say things like, I may be half dead, but I still remember where we buried the tax scrolls. The court chuckles nervously. The chancellor bites his nails, but deep down you carry the weight of it. You came that close. Not to death, perhaps, but to being stuffed, sealed, and surrounded by lilies. So you begin to live more deliberately. You taste new foods, you learn the lute, you read books with dragons in them. You sit on your tower balcony and stare at the sky, not to watch for omens, but just because it's blue. And sometimes, late at night, you press a hand to your chest and feel your own heartbeat. Soft, steady, stubborn, still here, still king, still too alive to embalm. They bury you, but then you cough. Yes, it happens exactly like that. You'd think, after the embalming misunderstanding, your advisors would exercise a little more caution around the concept of royal death. But bureaucracy has a momentum all its own, and once the wheels of funeral protocol are greased, there's no stopping them. Not even by the reluctant corpse in question. It begins, rather predictably, with another nap. You're 15, not quite 16, and still reeling from the recent spate of poetic tragedies that keep happening to you. There's been a lot of stress, rebuilding trust in your heartbeat, reorganizing the Privy Council, and recovering from the unpleasant incident with the bishop's tea, which turned out to be mostly wormwood and, bafflingly, one button. So you retreat once again to your chambers, where the light is soft and the blankets smell faintly of lavender and existential dread, and you fall into the deepest sleep yet. Too deep, so deep, in fact, that when your valet enters the room and finds you lying motionless, face pale, lips slightly parted, a single arm draped over Lord Bacon in what appears to be a final embrace, he assumes the worst. No breath, no response, No bell ringing from your wrist, because it had fallen off during an over-enthusiastic pillow adjustment earlier that day. He panics. Others are called. A physician arrives. He holds a candle to your nose. No flicker. He nods. "The king is gone," he says gravely. "You are not gone. You are napping like someone who has finally found the one perfect angle between mattress and neck. But you are, unfortunately, declared dead anyway. This time, they skip the embalming and go straight to burial. The bishop insists on swift rites. The nobles insist on swift inheritance discussions. The kitchen insists on making 400 tiny funeral pies, because tradition. Your body, still wonderfully alive, mind you, is bathed, robed, and placed in a carved cedar coffin, lined with velvet and filled with sachets of dried rosemary and peppercorn. A royal death blend. No one notices when you twitch once as they lower the lid. They assume it's the wind. The state funeral is held 2 days later. A vast and solemn affair. Bells toll. People weep dramatically. The jester performs a respectful cartwheel. Lord Bacon is placed beside you in the coffin, wearing a tiny black ribbon. You never would have agreed to that. Then comes the burial. The royal crypt is cold, echoing, and profoundly overdecorated. Your coffin is lowered into place, surrounded by statues of frowning saints and weeping angels. The final hymn is sung, off-key, thanks to a flautist with a cold, and the stone slab is sealed. And there you are, awake in the dark, confused, sweaty, slightly annoyed. The scent of peppercorn fills your lungs. You cough. It echoes, loudly. At first, you think perhaps you've dreamt it all. But when you hear the faint sound of someone above dropping a candlestick in sheer terror, you realize no, this is real. You were buried. Alive. There's more coughing, then shouting, then a muffled scream. 10 minutes later, a team of very pale, very sweaty monks begins unsealing the tomb. One faints halfway through. Another keeps crossing himself. You sit up slowly, blinking at the torchlight, hair askew, robe wrinkled. You squint. Did I miss dessert? It becomes the most infamous moment of your reign. The king who came back. You're immediately declared divinely protected, miraculously resurrected, and in one overly enthusiastic scroll, possibly immortal. You go along with it. It's easier than trying to explain that you were just very tired. The nobles weep, the commoners cheer. The bishop rebaptizes you in a barrel of wine. You try to decline. He insists. You smell like raisins for a week. The royal artists paint the moment of your return. Rays of light, stunned monks, and you with one hand raised, looking vaguely like someone who just awoke from a nap and isn't sure where their socks are. A tapestry is commissioned. In it, Lord Bacon hovers in the background, like a guardian spirit. You make a few key changes after that. First, all royal naps are now supervised. Second, you replace the funeral pies with welcome back biscuits, which are surprisingly popular. Third, you issue an official edict titled, "No more premature burials. Please and thank you." It is written in gold ink and hung in every royal hallway. And most importantly, you start living a little differently. Because when you've been declared dead twice and dug up once, You stop pretending that life is orderly. You start eating dessert first. You start greeting cats by name. You take long walks, longer baths, and learn the tambourine. Poorly, but enthusiastically. You even start writing letters to your future self. Just in case. Dear me, one reads, if you are reading this, you are still alive. Good job. You sign it with a flourish, because some kings are remembered for war, or riches, or glory. But you will be remembered as the one who coughed in his coffin and made history shudder. Returned from the dead to bad soup. That's how your next chapter begins. Not with fanfare, not with proclamations or glorious processions, but with a chipped ceramic bowl and a spoon that's slightly too large for your mouth. You are 16 now, no longer a boy, not quite a man, and very much not in the mood for leek stew. It's your first official meal since being exhumed. The castle staff, still unnerved by your unexpected resurrection, greet you with cautious reverence. They whisper in corridors, leave offerings of lavender under your pillow, and bow just a little too deeply when they pass you in the halls. You're treated more like a visiting spirit than a sovereign king. And yet, despite the religious awe, despite the endless muttered blessings, and the fact that the royal chapel is booked solid for weeks, with Thanksgiving masses, no one thought to improve the soup. It arrives lukewarm, watery, gray-green, like a pawn trying to be polite. You take a sip, wince, and declare, this tastes like regret and boiled grass. The cook, standing nervously by, blinks twice and offers to add more pepper. You decline. Meals become difficult. The court physician insists on feeding you lightly seasoned broths and foods gentle on the spirit, which apparently includes oatmeal, steamed carrots, and a gelatinous substance called holy aspic. You poke it with a fork. It jiggles ominously. You push it away. Your appetite, however, does not return easily. Perhaps it's the shock of being buried. Perhaps it's the rosemary sachets they stuffed under your tongue. Or perhaps it's the way people now stare at you when you chew, as though each bite might trigger a divine message. Eat slowly, Majesty, the steward says, as if you might dissolve if hurried. You begin sneaking food. Late at night, you tiptoe to the kitchens and steal warm bread, slices of roasted apple, the occasional spoonful of plum preserves. You hide them in your sleeves and eat under the stars, seated beside your stuffed pig, Lord Bacon, who has somehow survived yet another round of ceremonial neglect. Still, the rumors swirl. He eats only by moonlight. He speaks to animals now. He glows faintly in the dark. You do nothing to correct them. If anything, you lean in. You start wearing cloaks that billow dramatically, even when there's no wind. You pause before speaking, gaze at the ceiling, and say cryptic things like, all things are impermanent, except gooseberries. You take long walks in the garden, trailing your fingers along hedges and muttering plant names. You develop a fondness for staring into the distance with narrowed eyes. People begin calling you the twice-born. You correct them. The one snapped, technically. The new jester incorporates your ordeal into his act, performing a skit where he pretends to be a sleepy king awakened by an aggressive soup. You laugh harder than anyone. The court breathes easier, a little, and then come the gifts. Peasants leave flowers outside the gates. Bakers craft crown-shaped loaves and send them with notes that say things like, blessed by yeast for His Highness. One particularly fervent shoemaker delivers a pair of sandals embroidered with the words, "Walk again among us." You wear them once. They squeak. The clergy, unsurprisingly, try to canonize you. A committee convenes. A bishop argues that surviving both burial and leek stew qualifies as a miracle. A monk writes a 47-stanza poem titled, "He Slept Yet Rose." You skim it. It rhymes tomb with room 15 times. To avoid sainthood, you begin doing very unsaint-like things. You make a fart noise during a council meeting. You spill ink on a visiting ambassador's map and say, "Oops, guess we're at war now." You host a feast where everyone must eat with their hands, including the bishop. You wear bright red socks to morning prayer. The attempt at canonization quietly vanishes. But still, your court is changed. No one tells you no anymore. If you ask for a cake in the shape of a horse, you get it. If you want a throne made of hay bales and old cloaks, it appears within the hour. When you request a choir to sing only in harmonized whispers, someone invents a new notation system called murmur script. And yet amidst the absurdity, you notice something. You're truly king now, not just the boy in a crown, not the heir with jelly-stained robes, not the giggling child with a stuffed pig and a nervous tutor. You have passed through something, a place few return from. And while your hair is a bit thinner, your eyebrows more skeptical, and your patience for bad soup entirely gone, you're alive. Fully bizarrely, undeniably alive. So you begin again. You host open courts where commoners tell stories instead of petitions. You learn the names of every stable hand and scullery maid. You commission a mural, not of your battles or your throne, but of the night sky above your tower, exactly as it looked the moment you coughed and changed your fate. And when guests visit, you offer them soup. Always the same, leek, slightly warm, just tolerable. You watch their faces as they taste it. You wait for the cough. They never do. But you smile anyway, because you did. And that somehow was enough. You finally die of boredom at court. Or rather, nearly do. No swords, no cheese, no cursed linens or unfortunate poultry. Just an unrelenting, soul-flattening avalanche of political tedium that slowly chokes the spirit, dulls the mind, and leaves you wondering if being buried again might be preferable to hearing the word levy one more time. You're 17 now, a proper monarch. Full height, full voice, a wardrobe of stiff collars and heavier cloaks. Your face adorns coins, tapestries, and a questionable mural in the bathhouse. You are, to the outside world, the picture of strength and wisdom. Inside, you're melting. It begins with a council meeting. As always, you sit on your throne, a slightly too firm seat that always smells faintly of dust and goose feather, and listen to the treasurer describe in excruciating detail the proposed increase in barley tax across the southern counties. And thus, Your Majesty, he says, if we increase the levy by 3 parts per crate, adjusted for seasonal variance, we can redistribute the surplus toward infrastructural reinforcements in districts with, you blink, not out of confusion, but out of existential despair. Your eyes drift to the window. A cloud passes. Somewhere, a bird chirps. The treasurer continues. You consider what would happen if you stood up and screamed. Just once, just to see. Instead, you nod. The Chancellor takes this as approval. He moves to the next point. An inquiry into the standardization of bucket width. You lean back deeply. That's when it happens. Your breath slows. Your hands go limp. Your eyes glaze. A scribe nearby whispers, "Is he asleep?" The steward leans in. You do not move. You do not blink. Someone drops a spoon. You remain still. They panic. Again. A physician is summoned. Again. The bishop begins humming a hymn. Again. A nurse checks your pulse. "Faint," she says, "but present." Then you snore. Everyone exhales. A noble faints. The Chancellor weeps. You awaken hours later in the royal solar, lying on a cushioned bench, a warm compress on your forehead, and a document titled "Urgent Report on Wheelbarrow Distribution Policies" placed gently on your chest. You throw it into the fire. "I can't do it," you mutter. "The buckets, the barley, the benches, it's all just dust and decimal points." No one argues. In the days that follow, you attempt to revive your interest in governance. You try attending meetings in disguise, a hooded figure in the corner, but someone always recognizes your boots. You try delegating authority, but your nobles nearly start a civil war over who gets control of the kingdom's candle wax inventory. Desperate, you propose Fun Court Fridays. The idea is simple. 1 day a week, no business allowed. Instead, debates are held on absurd topics. Is a potato a fruit if you wear it like a hat? Could a goose become mayor if properly trained? What is the legal definition of wiggly? The first session is a disaster. The second is slightly better. By the third, people begin smiling again, but your boredom persists. So you turn to stranger pursuits. You learn to juggle, badly. You join the castle choir and insist on singing all parts of a hymn yourself. Simultaneously, the choirmaster resigns. You take up painting and produce 37 watercolors of the same window. Your advisor praises them as deeply meditative. You name the collection Light, slightly different. You commission a pet hedgehog whom you name Admiral Prickle. He does nothing. You admire him for it. Still, the restlessness lingers. You wander the castle at night, barefoot, cloak billowing, pretending to be a ghost. One guard nearly soils himself. You feel only slightly guilty. Eventually, you write a decree. Henceforth, all matters of grave importance must be delivered while wearing a silly hat. It is controversial. It is not repealed. Then comes the turning point. You host a gathering for the kingdom's lesser-known thinkers, inventors, dreamers, poets who've been banned from taverns. They arrive with wild hair and stranger ideas. One man proposes a machine that counts clouds. A woman unveils a type of soap that sings. A child reads a poem about a pigeon named Kenneth, who wants to be a lighthouse. You laugh, genuinely. And in that moment, something shifts. You realize that boredom was never about the barrels or the taxes or even the buckets. It was about silence, about sameness, about forgetting that life, real life, is weird and funny and full of accidental brilliance. So you rewrite your schedule. Mondays, policy. Tuesdays, poetry. Wednesdays, rest. Thursdays, cheese tastings. Carefully tested, of course. Fridays, fun court. Saturdays, nothing at all. Sundays, you go barefoot and feed breadcrumbs to the courtyard ducks while humming off-key. The ducks do not mind, and when foreign dignitaries visit, they find a king who debates with clarity, laughs without pretense, and rules with a mixture of wisdom and whimsy. You still attend council meetings, but now the table has a bowl of jokes in the center. Each member must read one before the meeting begins. The treasurer hates it. You love that. So no, you didn't die of boredom. Not quite. But you came close enough to understand what it would have felt like. And you vowed never to let it catch you again. Your tomb is raided by ferrets. That's the headline, years after you're finally, officially, properly dead. Not tragically, not heroically, just quietly. You drift away one night in your sleep, at the age of 79, surrounded by cats, lukewarm tea, and the soft sound of a harp being played by a court musician who once composed a ballad called "The Crown Slipped, but He Never Did." The kingdom mourns, deeply, strangely. 100 bells ring out. Even your surviving childhood nurse, now 1,000 years old and made entirely of wool and judgment, sheds a single tear. Your funeral is grand but mercifully brief. You had requested no long speeches, no stuffed pigeons, and absolutely no resurrection attempts. They comply. You're buried in the royal crypt beneath the chapel of slightly broken saints. A cool, solemn place filled with marble coffins, worn-stained glass, and whispers of overly dramatic ancestors. Your tomb is elaborate, carved limestone with your likeness in repose, hands folded over your chest, Lord Bacon immortalized at your feet in miniature marble. The inscription reads, "Here lies the twice-buried king. Long may he nap." The end, right? Well, no, because decades later, long after your name becomes a footnote in dusty scrolls, and your crown sits in a glass box labeled "too pointy for daily use," a curious event unfolds. It begins with a scratching sound, low, persistent, coming from beneath the crypt. At first, the monks blame rats. But rats don't arrange bones. Rats don't leave pebbles stacked in geometric patterns. And rats most certainly don't leave behind shiny buttons arranged in perfect circles. Then the noises grow louder. Monks descend with candles and firm voices. They find the latch to your tomb slightly ajar. That's when the first ferret appears, sleek, gray, wearing, and this is true, a tiny piece of ribbon tied around its neck. They don't panic immediately. Ferrets are uncommon, but not impossible. Perhaps it wandered in from the woods. Perhaps it belongs to a noblewoman with eccentric pets and poor boundaries. But then come the others, 2, 4, 7. A dozen ferrets, emerging from shadows, from cracks, from secret crevices no one had ever noticed before. They move with purpose, with coordination. They are not panicked. They are not lost. They are raiding. A terrified novice witnesses one ferret dragging away a silver spoon. Another is spotted carrying a rolled parchment. Your will, perhaps, or a recipe. No one can be sure. A third ferret stands guard, while the others explore your sarcophagus. When the monks finally muster the courage to peer inside, they find that the velvet pillow beneath your head has been chewed into a nest containing 6 baby ferrets, tiny, squirming, regal somehow. The monks retreat. They pray. They debate whether this is an omen, A royal edict is issued, do not disturb the ferrets. And so, your tomb becomes their kingdom. Over time, the legend grows. They are called the Order of the Weasel, secret guardians of the twice-buried king, protectors of royal trinkets and stale breadcrumbs. Children whisper that if you leave a slice of plum cake by the chapel door, the ferrets will bring you luck. Or at least a shiny pebble. The crypt is no longer just a place of rest. It's a place of curiosity, of wonder, of squeaks and rustles, and the occasional stolen shoe. No one really understands why the ferrets came, or what they want, or why one of them once dragged out your ceremonial sock and laid it gently at the feet of a visiting duchess. But one thing is certain, you are not forgotten, you are not alone, and somewhere, deep beneath the stone, in the flickering half-light of the crypt, a marble pig stands watch over a colony of ferrets who remember your reign in ways no historian ever could. They squeak in your honor. They chew with reverence. And occasionally, on very quiet nights, they rearrange pebbles into the shape of a tiny crown. History forgets you, but we remember. Not in the grand, chiseled-into-stone sort of way, of course. Your name, once spoken in cathedral echoes and printed on banners, is eventually lost amid the shuffle of louder kings, flashier wars, and more photogenic revolts. You don't make it into the glorious tapestries of conquest, nor the glowing genealogies scribbled by overeager monks. Most scholars dismiss your reign as uneventful, which is ironic, given the cheese, the plague, the ferrets, and the burials. But they weren't there, were they? They never saw the way you blinked at ambassadors just long enough to unsettle them. How you steered the realm through nonsense, with a soft voice and a dangerous sense of humor. How you survived, really, actually, physically survived, things that would have unseated any other monarch, from pigeon-borne disasters to bureaucratic asphyxiation by barley tax. Your portrait hangs, dusty and misattributed, in a minor castle museum. The label reads, Unidentified noble, 14th century, possibly a cleric. The stuffed pig on the shelf beside it is catalogued as small bore effigy, funerary object. A ferret sketch in the margins of a court ledger is the only real trace of your reign in the royal archives. But folk memory thrives. Old storytellers still chuckle about the boy who ruled by accident, slept through his own funeral, and returned from the grave only to outlaw decorative spikes. Children pretend to be you when playing King of the Castle. One child wears a crooked crown and shouts, "Bring me soup, but not that soup," in taverns far from the capital. Old men raise mugs and toast to the king who sneezed death away. Your legacy is tucked not in history books, but in lullabies and dinner table jokes. In weathered sayings like, "He's alive as twice-buried Tom," or "Don't wear a crown you can't sleep in." And somewhere in the hills, on a quiet spring morning, a girl watching the sunrise might ask her grandmother, "Did the king really get stuck in the privy?" And the grandmother, smiling into her tea, will say, "He got out, didn't he? Because what you left behind is something gentler, something stranger, not power, not empire, but something more useful, perhaps. A reminder that ruling doesn't always mean roaring, that sometimes surviving is enough, that laughter can be leadership, that dignity isn't ruined by a fall into the moat if you climb out waving. That a man who ruled through accidents and awkwardness, with cats, biscuits, and whispered wit, might be the kind of king most worth remembering. You fade from the record, but you remain in the ripple, and that really is more than most kings ever get. Now the pages grow soft. The stone floor of your crypt cools to velvet beneath you. The flicker of candlelight narrows to a glow, warm as breath. The air stills. No banners wave, no court bells ring. Even the ferrets are quiet now, curled like commas beside marble feet. You, dear listener, you drift with him. With the boy who napped too hard. With the monarch who coughed in his own tomb. With the king who ruled with pastry crumbs on his collar and a sense of timing only fate could admire. You are safe in his story now. The halls are silent. The moonlight climbs slowly over the ramparts, spills gently across the garden hedges, pools inside your chest like calm. There are no more taxes, no more meetings, no more soup. Only soft wool, a quiet throne, a crown that finally fits, and a breeze that smells faintly of honey and old parchment. You are not a king tonight. You are just someone resting. And you are home, so sleep now. Let the ferrets keep watch. Let the candles gutter out. Let the past exhale. The kingdom is quiet, and morning is far, far away.